Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for the latest episode of What We Do in the Shadows, The Roast. And this is a hard one to review, because I don't think it's a bad episode, but I don't think it's a good episode. I think we have found the antithesis of the trial episode. Now, I could definitely see why a lot of people would be like, wow, this did a pretty good job of escalating it completely crazily. And I kind of disagree with that. Now, granted, I think that it could have naturally escalated to this kind of point, but it just seemed that we started off with a certain kind of premise that in and of itself had potential, and then completely and utterly shifted gears to a left field kind of track that just kind of went off. And granted, it still works within the main kind of plot points that we are working through this season, but it just was like, what? Not even like a misdirection. We started with the roast, and then we suddenly get to dealing with Guillermo and the Baron and everything, which I had almost thought we had kind of had, like, already dealt with at this point. It's really kind of strange how this episode worked out. But the thing is, it's like, I'd almost say that it's almost like trying to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but on one side you have the peanut butter of your base, and then you've got cucumber jelly that somehow got made and swished on it, and you're like, why are these two things together? It's almost like two episodes got thunderfucked together, and just like, alright. So we start off and we see that Laszlo is in some kind of stupor that's been going on for weeks. Nadja's worried, Nandor's worried, Colin Robinson is kind of worried because he's been doing everything he can to kind of even try and get a drain out of him, but he's not even seeing Colin Robinson doing all this stuff of talking about warranties and all that. Nadja's worried because they're only down to 16 fucks 16 fucks a week, I think. Nandor's down to 3 fucks a week, and I'm like, he's still able to do that? Like, no, granted, it is Laszlo, who is supposed to be like this great lover and everything, so even in a kind of weird state where he's like, yes, thank you, just repeating this kind of phrase, and Guillermo thinks that it's because of his kind of problem, that Laszlo hasn't found a solution, and that it's like driving him batshit crazy, and that he's gone into a hyper mode of trying to think a way to kind of fix it. We learn that that's not the case by the end of the episode, and that's one of the great kind of things about it. But they get together, and Nandor and the guide and everybody are talking. They're trying to figure out what's going on, what to kind of do. Nadja, of course, throws shit at Guillermo, being like, you're sad and pathetic. What do you do? In that kind of stage, like, and then the guide throws out the idea of the roast. Now, the guide is handled very strangely in this episode. She obviously always kind of feels like the odd one out at this point within the group, but I'm not quite sure if her intentions were malicious, as things kind of go off the rails into the other kind of territory of what kind of goes on. So we then see that, like, other people pick up the whole roast idea, but they don't credit the guide, and so they then go and do the whole roast issue. And I thought this would have been a kind of better one, because this had potential. Now, just because they kind of drop it and then kind of go off and do another direction, I don't think it's a bad thing. It had potential. They could have done a lot kind of wackier, crazier, kind of zanier things. And I can see how the idea of where we eventually shift off to is like, oh, we could do this and escalate it. But the thing is, it's not naturally executed to feel that kind of organic. It just is like, what the fuck? And then we're off doing other kind of shit. So they're doing the roast. It's actually going pretty well. They're doing some good hits on Laszlo, doing some good kind of bits on the rest. They even have the Baron there, which is how we get the seed of the next kind of pretty much story that kind of works on. We also get an interesting tidbit that Colin Robinson brings up, that he's been having dreams that he'd been calling Laszlo daddy and that he'd been wiping his bottom and stuff. It's like, this is kind of weird. And Nandor and Nadja are like, that literally fucking happened. You were a baby. And it's really kind of, I don't know how they're handling this thing with Colin Robinson. It's almost like a complete rewrite happened. Like, Colin got pretty much up to prime age for an energy vampire. He read all that kind of stuff, and it, like, memory wiped him, except for these kind of dreams that he's having. So that's an odd kind of thing. I'm glad that they're at least having some kind of repercussions from the time that Laszlo took to actually raise baby Colin back up to regular kind of Colin. But I kind of wanted more of it than just, oh, we're not going to deal with this until, not even deal with this, just bring this up until, like, episode 8 out of 10. It's like, shit. And, by the way, next week is a 2-hour season finale. Well, not 2 hour, but at least 2 episodes. Not 2 hour. I'm sorry. 2 episodes, so it should be 1 hour. Sorry. Episode lengths are kind of different, and I'm just like, whoa. That's right, this is 30 minutes, even though they kind of pull it out to be kind of longer, which some cases actually work to certain kind of episode detriments. But we'll have a 2-episode finale next week, and waiting until this deep into the season to even try and hit on the ramifications of, like, how Colin and Laszlo's relationship should be pretty much different. I'm like, okay, and it just kind of, like, pops up out of nowhere. It's like, alright, so we see them kind of bantering back and forth. Then we see that Andor starts hitting on the Baron, but he's not really getting the jokes, and then the guy decides to tell him about him getting pretty much flash fried by Guillermo, and that he's a vampire hunter, and I'm like, have we not dealt with this? Did he not know that he had Van Helsing blood? I'm pretty sure it should have come up. And granted, the guide is like, oh yeah, I kind of hate it when I'm not in on jokes and whatnot. So I don't think it was malicious to then start off on this thing where the Baron goes up and starts berating everybody, calling them soft, which is kind of weird, and then pretty much going after and trying to kill Guillermo. And it's like, I thought that the Baron pretty much knew, as whatever kind of fucking story that they told, that he kind of got drunk and he got kind of fucked up, and then he wasn't paying attention and he got fucking fried, and they thought he died, and then they kind of bring his ass back out, and then they just, like, got him back to, like, square one. And then he's just immediately on a kill path of going after Guillermo. Now, granted, having this kind of situation with housemates to deal with works out. I mean, we only had minimal Nadja whining about the hex, pretty much putting that onto Laszlo being in his weird kind of stupor state. We see them kind of, like, running around the house. Guillermo stabbing the Baron with kind of like a piece of wood in the arm, and then getting outside, kind of hiding. We do get some good effects where the Baron pretty much fucks up a car pretty much, so I'm like, hey, effects team, always gotta hand it. Effects and costuming, especially the Baron's costuming. Well, granted, all of them. Even though I don't say it enough, the costuming and the set design and what they kind of do, really still top notch. So Guillermo's kind of running around. The housemates are trying to figure out what to do, and they're like, okay, let's try and pretty much keep away from Guillermo, and then just kind of figure out what's kind of going on. So they pretty much get Guillermo, and they say that, hey, we got the Baron in this for last second. He's like, it's kind of weird that he can't really do that. So they kind of tase his ass, and Colin Robinson was pretty much helping out. And then they do the same thing to the Baron. It's like, oh, okay, what's the meaning of this? They pretty much knock him out, and then they pretty much try and get him to kind of work together to work this kind of out. And the thing is, Nandor then kind of goes away to kind of like get some blood. He was going to use, tell Guillermo to get it, but of course his familiar's chained up. The Baron pretty much is like, yes, I'll accept your apology after I kill you. He's like, no, I did not attempt to kill you. And listen, I can understand if I'm put in a situation where I pretty much almost got killed. I can totally accept an accidental kind of one, like, especially with Guillermo having vampire hunter blood and everything like that. And then he pretty much explains to the Baron that he's renounced his vampire hunting lineage, that he's a vampire now. And then the Baron's like, oh, that's pretty good for Nandor turning a Helsing with the bloodline. All right. He's like, he didn't. Derek did. And then it's funny because Colin's like, I do not want to be a part of this narrative. And it's really almost kind of meta. And I'm like, I kind of get it. It's kind of gotten off the rails in its execution at this point. Now, granted, it has a story that has really good and interesting potential for Guillermo and Nandor and everything like that. It just comes down to the execution for me. And if you like this and like this episode and everything and this kind of story, that's fine. That's cool. Enjoy it. Have that awesomeness. Have that happiness. Never want to take that away. But we just went from the roast kind of stuff to this. It's like, what? And it just takes some leaps of like, I thought we kind of dealt with this. It's kind of weird to have it like this. That going on. Everybody else pretty much learning about that kind of stuff. Even the guide. And she's like, yeah, I guess I could keep a secret. Even though she literally just blurted a thing about Guillermo in this episode to the Baron. Which I didn't think would have been any kind of secret. But the Baron's like, oh yeah, he's gonna fucking kill you. And then he's gonna kill himself. But whatever. It's like one of the heights of humiliation and betrayal for a vampire. It's like, to a degree, but the thing is, we have this kind of difference in how time is thought of and how people are thought of. Because Nandor could have turned him at any time. And the thing is, at this point, we had also had a bit before this where the Laszlo in his state was still able to relay information to the Baron. You're like, yeah, the wanking shed, that's where he's at. And then the Baron comes in and says, yeah, I killed his ass, but we find out that it was actually the fish one that somehow was able to transform enough into Guillermo, which is kind of weird. And Laszlo's like, that's not Gizmo. That's one of my fucked up experiments that I did with him. Oh yes, look, see? It's got gills, it's pregnant, and it's got little things that, toad things, that still pop up at the end of the episode. And it's like, oh, okay. Good thing I remembered that. But it's like, okay, and it was important because Nandor says that Guillermo was his friend. He wasn't just his familiar, he was his bodyguard, his best man at his wedding, and his friend. It's like, yeah, but you don't tell him that, you don't show him that. And if you don't do any of that, it doesn't matter what you actually think of the relationship if you don't show it and do and act upon that. They're not gonna know. And you're not gonna know either. You know what I mean? So that was a good kind of bit. But then of course we see that the Baron keeps his secret. Guillermo thanks him. Like, yeah, you're gonna get fucking killed anyway. Who gives a shit? We'll see how this kind of situation works out. And then Guillermo opens the door for him and accidentally flash fries the fucker a second time. So, it's just like, oh god. Still funny. And then Guillermo runs out and they're like, oh god, he looks like a shriveled nutsack. And then the Baron comes down and is like, you know what? I was thinking I was gonna do that, but I'm good here. And then he just goes back home. Like, he's like, I was angry at myself. I was soft. And then we see him going through his neighborhood. Nobody was scared of him. He was just doing his kind of thing with the ancient one. And then he goes back and he pretty much keeps his scarred visage. Everybody's afraid of him. He's training the little toad vampire things. Some of them die and he flushes them down the toilet and having a good old time. He's like, yeah, I'm alright. And we see that Guillermo had hid in Nandor's coffin, and he seems like he was going to tell him, but of course the Baron also had said that it's best if he hears it from you. Deal with this whole situation. But Guillermo doesn't do it in this episode. Nandor gets in his coffin and pretty much is like, oh, you're hiding something from me. Did you do a fart in the coffin? And he's like, yeah, I did a fart in the coffin, just to like hide it kind of out. And it's interesting because he wanted to know if it was the real Guillermo, talking about like the card that he gave him, that it's like, I always dreamed of being a vampire, but the honor would be me being your familiar. And it's interesting that Nandor does remember that stuff. It's important to kind of bring that stuff up and try to make sure that it's the real Guillermo, but also their kind of connection. And having Guillermo feel kind of even more worse about this whole fucked up situation. Even though he had a right to feel this way, he went about it in a completely wrong way. He should have went to Nandor and be like, turn me or let me loose as your familiar. Release me, I'm done. But now we've got this whole crazy ass situation that like nobody else in the house wants. It was cool to see the doll also again, even though she didn't have much of a role. And then that's kind of where we close out the main story. And then we get towards the end and we see that Laszlo has been thinking about how to organize his books in alphabetical order by either author or title, and he decides upon author. And that's what he's been thinking about for like 3 weeks or whatnot. It's peak Laszlo. And even though he was stuck in one certain kind of mode, the actor was just fucking rocking it and just doing like the best. So even though he was sidelined with this kind of weird, stupid thing, it still worked out to be a Laszlo thing to do. So I'm interested to see what other kind of stuff we'll get him doing in the 2-episode finale that we'll be getting and how that's going to shake out. So my biggest kind of issue is how it just shifted crazily from the roast, and that had potential to have done some crazy ass shit, but I just needed a better, more organic execution of getting to that escalation point of the Baron and Guillermo and everything kind of going weird like that, because we're 5 seasons in and I thought they'd already kind of dealt with this, and now it's kind of brought back up as a major kind of pain point, which I always like stuff being dealt more directly like this. It's just, I thought we had already kind of dealt with this stuff, especially when the Baron came back. I don't know. That's my thing. Like, I don't think this was bad, and I think that if this had worked out in a better kind of way, either the whole Baron situation being maybe a different kind of inciting incident and taking up the whole episode to deal with this and set the stage for the next 2 episodes to end out season 5, I think I would have liked it better. But I don't think this is a bad or horrendous episode. There's a lot of good kind of funny stuff. Sean being in there with the roast as well. But both of these kind of deserve their own episodes, or to at least be interlinked a little bit better. It was just a very strange episode for me. So those are my opinions on the episode. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.